Axel Rudakabana, who is 18, pleaded guilty at Liverpool Crown Court to murdering 3 young girls. The British man accused of the Southport attack, in which 3 young girls were stabbed to death, has changed his plea on the first day of his trial, pleading guilty to all charges. He also pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of 8 other children and to the attempted murder of Leanne Lucas and Jonathan Hayes.
The UK government's decision not to classify the Southport killer as a terrorist has sent shockwaves across the nation. Despite Axel Rudakubana's possession of extremist materials and his meticulously planned attack on children at a Taylor Swift dance class, officials insist he doesn't meet the terrorism threshold. But is this simply a convenient reclassification to avoid uncomfortable questions? 3 innocent girls dead, 10 others wounded, and now a startling new designation emerges: the non-terrorist mass casualty offender. Are we witnessing the birth of a dangerous new narrative designed to protect institutions rather than children?
The events today are just truly awful, and I know the whole country is deeply shocked at what they've seen and what they've heard. I do want to thank the emergency services of Merseyside Police who've had to respond to the most difficult of circumstances today. But I do also think about the emergency responders because they have responded to an awful incident today, and I want to thank them for the professionalism that they have shown in doing so.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. What if I told you that a man who meticulously planned a mass killing, possessed an Al-Qaeda manual, and experimented with deadly ricin isn't considered a terrorist by the British government? In what might be one of the most shocking legal reclassifications in recent memory, the authorities have created an entirely new category to avoid labeling the Southport attacker what many believe he truly is. Jonathan Hall, KC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, has proposed a curious solution to the Rudakubana case. Rather than addressing the glaring failures that allowed this attack to happen, Hall has recommended creating a new offense: non-terrorist mass casualty attack planning. This new classification would carry a life sentence, but crucially would not fall under terrorism laws. It's a remarkable piece of bureaucratic gymnastics that raises serious questions about the government's priorities. The contrast is stark between the horrific reality of what happened at that Taylor Swift dance class and the sanitized language officials now use. Children were attacked with chilling precision in what should have been a safe space, yet Prime Minister Keirstarmer describes perpetrators like Rudakubana merely as loners and misfits. This deliberate softening of language reveals an uncomfortable truth: that acknowledging terrorism might force acknowledgement of institutional failure.
We have to be very, very careful about the suspect, the defendant, who has been charged now with the murders of 3 kids and attacking kids. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, and indeed the police knew that there was a terror-related aspect to Axel Rudakubana.
Well, I think the timing was very carefully engineered. I think my own sense is that Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary knew perfectly well about these extra details.
A deeper look at Rudakubana's home reveals the disturbing extent of his extremist tendencies. Police searches uncovered not just an Al-Qaeda manual, but also documents related to Nazi Germany, the Rwandan genocide, and instructions for car bombs. This wasn't just a troubled individual. This was someone methodically studying mass violence across multiple extremist ideologies. Hall's justification for not expanding the terrorism definition is particularly telling. He warns that broadening the definition could create false positives and risk prosecuting people who aren't genuinely terrorists. His exact words were, "Such is the functional importance of the terrorism definition, that redefinition would alter the landscape." But one must ask, if someone planning mass murder while studying terrorist materials doesn't qualify as terrorism?
Inside Number 10 set out precisely why, in his experience, Sir Keir Starmer would have known about this perhaps within hours.
You know, in the House of Commons, you have legal privilege. Why did the Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, Labour, why did he tell MPs that they mustn't discuss this?
And I took that to be very, very credible information. And it was extraordinary at Prime Minister's questions today to see the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, effectively shutting MPs down.
What exactly does the government's shift in narrative from ideological terrorism to extreme violence carried out by loners represents more than just semantic quibbling. It's a convenient reframing that absolves institutions of responsibility. By recasting Ruta Cubana as a lone actor rather than someone who should have been caught by counter-terrorism measures, the failures of those systems disappear from public discourse. Creating this new classification serves another purpose beyond legal clarity. It protects the government from having to admit catastrophic failures in their Prevent counterterrorism program. If Ruta Cubana isn't officially a terrorist, then Prevent didn't fail to catch a terrorist. Problem solved through redefinition rather than reform. Hall himself acknowledged a significant gap in current law, noting that police couldn't arrest individuals planning attacks unless they were on the cusp of committing them. But rather than strengthening existing terrorism laws, the solution offered is a parallel track that conveniently sidesteps the terrorism label altogether. The most disturbing aspect of this reclassification becomes apparent when we consider the warning signs that were repeatedly ignored. Ruta Cubana wasn't invisible to authorities. He was referred to the Prevent counterterrorism program not once, not twice, but 3 times between 2019 and 2021. Yet each time, authorities determined he didn't fit the mold of a potential extremist, despite his documented obsession with violence. This wasn't a case of someone flying completely under the radar. This was a case of someone clearly visible who was repeatedly misjudged. Authorities believed he didn't align with a single clear ideological cause, and therefore didn't escalate his case. The system was looking for neat ideological boxes that a modern-day violent extremist simply didn't fit into. The tragedy of Southport reveals a counter-terrorism apparatus designed to catch yesterday's threats while missing today's. Ruta Cubana didn't pledge allegiance to ISIS or wave a specific flag, so he slipped through cracks in a system that prioritizes ideological purity over actual danger. His ideological promiscuity, studying everything from Al-Qaeda to Nazism, should have made him more concerning, not less. Behind the government's word games and classifications lies the raw devastation this attack has inflicted on real families. Jenny Stancombe, Elsie's mother, captured the unbearable reality when she said, "His actions have left us with a lifetime of grief, and it is only right that he faces the same." Her hope that Ruta Cubana remains haunted by his actions speaks volumes about justice that bureaucratic reclassifications cannot address. The launch of a public inquiry reveals what we already know. The system catastrophically failed. Prime Minister Starmer has admitted as much, yet the response seems focused on semantics rather than substance. Instead of honestly confronting why a young man referred to Prevent 3 times wasn't properly assessed, we're getting linguistic gymnastics and new legal categories. The promised urgent review of Prevent acknowledges it failed to identify threats outside traditional extremist profiles, precisely what critics have been saying for years. But will this actually fix anything? Or is it simply another bureaucratic exercise while grieving families like those of Alice, Bibi, and Elsie are left wondering if their children's deaths could have been prevented with something as basic as proper threat assessment?